I am so excited today to have poet Jennifer Walcott on the second episode of Heart to Art. Born to a family of secretive women, shut-mouthed women, Jennifer calls them, she's the one to reveal the secrets her family has tried so hard to conceal in her memoir, How Many Miles to Yesterday, and her new book of poetry, The Itch of Ghosts and Other Poems. Jennifer was born and raised in Jamaica. She's lived in England, and now has made Canada home. She's worked in community development, in radio and organizational development. She's also a retired teacher, mother, and grandmother. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on to the second episode of Heart to Art. I'm so excited to have you with us today and to have a chat with you about your book of poetry.
Well, thank you so much, Peta-Gaye. I'm excited too, and very, very pleased and flattered to have been asked to do this.
Absolutely. So we met many years ago, but we were recently reunited when we both launched our books at the Consulate General of Jamaica on May 9th. And I was thrilled to listen to your poetry. It resonated on a cellular level. It was poetry that told a story. So let's just dive right in. The Itch of Ghosts. What is the Itch of Ghosts?
Well, the itch is this, well, it's like an itch that I have been trying for many years to scratch as I try to find out stories about my family. You know, I've always envied people. So, for example, many years ago, Lorna Goodison, who was a Jamaican poet of great fame and talent, she wrote a memoir and she talked about her mother and other people in the family telling all these stories every night. And I read that and I was so envious. And I thought, I didn't have that. And that, I think reading that from Harvey River started this itch for me. It's like, where are those stories? What did they do? And many of them, unfortunately, are now dead. So I cannot get them. So that's the itch that I've been trying to scratch by putting together little bits and pieces and making up some of it.
When did you realize that your family was secreted, the woman in your family?
I think I've always known it, but maybe never articulated that to myself. Because I remember a long time ago, my mother's been dead for nearly 20 years. But before that, I would say to her, so what did you used to do as a child? And she said, oh, we used to ride bicycle. That was it. And I can't even picture my mother on a bicycle, to tell you the truth. But anyway, she wouldn't tell any stories. And I would even say to her, why don't you write them down? Why don't you let me interview you? She said, oh, they don't matter. And, you know, so this kind of denigration of self and not thinking that these stories are important. Yeah.
So my question is, why do you think it was you who came into this world and divulged so much of what I think your family was trying to conceal, whether out of shame or not feeling that their stories were important? You have unlocked the shut mouth woman.
Yes, you're quite right. And my older sister often says to me, why you have to talk about this? Why you have to talk about this? And I don't think she has any sort of sense of shame or anything. It's just like, but that's private. But that's a theme in Jamaica, don't you find?
Yes.
People think, oh, you have to keep your business quiet. And I guess I spend too much time outside of Jamaica and become very North American. I chat my business everywhere.
You chat your business, telling everybody. Well, you're absolutely right. And in the poem Weeping Beach, you write, and now I am in my autumn. I'll expose the trunk, sinews, strengths. I want you all to know. why do you think, apart from living in North America, why do you think you have become more vulnerable, more willing to share in the autumn of your life?
Well, I do think it's partly experience. The older you get, then you realize that things that you thought were important are not so important. And there are other things that are more important. And I also have an adult daughter and a grandson. He's just 7. But I thought, by the time he is an adult, I probably will not be here. And where will he go for the stories?
Yeah.
So that's the and quite frankly, the older you get, the less shame you have.
So your poetry reveals childhood wounds.
Mhm.
And we come from a small community in Jamaica. I mean, I'm saying Jamaica, but we really do come from a place where everybody knows someone else. Do you ever feel that your poems reveal too much? And do you even care at this point?
I don't think so. I think the poems that reveal the most about others other than myself, those people are no longer alive. Um, so I mean, if I have to answer to them in the afterlife, then so be it. But they're not, they're not here, and I don't think I've said anything about anyone that is not relatable to somebody else. So there's no secret that was so terrible that it couldn't be revealed.
Absolutely. I want to bring up another poem that you've written called Orchid Lady.
Mm-hmm.
You write how she was tied down to hearth and home, secured by her parents' fears. In the same poem, you bring us to the end of her life, where we will all end up eventually wrapped up and sent on her way. What do you mean, first of all, by tied down to hearth and home, secured by parents' fears?
Okay, so that was an aunt, my father's sister. She was the only girl in the family. And while the boys could go merrily on their way and explore life and get married, she was kept at home for a long time to look after her mother. So she never married. But the other thing too, that the poem begins with twisted feet like orchid roots, because she was an orchid lady. She had a beautiful orchid house, and there were all these amazing orchids. I have not inherited the talent to grow them, but it was beautiful. But when she was born, her feet were turned in, and she had to wear special braces and shoes. So it seemed to me that her feet and the orchids share a similarity. But that's what tied her to home, because I think her mother especially wanted to keep her away from the outside world. And so she was tied to home.
Some poems are in patois, the vernacular of Jamaica. How natural is it for you to write in patois?
Very, very. Sometimes, because those of us who speak Jamaican, as we think in that sometimes, and especially times of intense emotion, that's the language that comes. So it's very natural for me to write that way. Although I will say there are a couple of poems that started off in standard English, and they didn't feel right, and it wasn't until I put them in Jamaican that they made sense.
I think a lot of people can understand this. I mean, it is the language, I think, of passion. Is this why you use patois in the poem Mother to Daughter? Is it the urgency to pass on your wisdom to your child?
Yes, definitely, very definitely, and it's a strong gut emotion, so it goes to my first language.
Do you think that the children of Caribbean parents really get that passion when we speak patois to them rather than the standard English?
Oh, I don't know. I know my daughter does. And I mean, she wasn't even born in Jamaica, but she lived there as a child. And she definitely thinks and lives in that language and is even teaching her son. It is so cute.
Very cute. Jennifer, what led you on this path of writing poetry?
I I first started writing poetry just, the way we all do in school because your teachers get you to write poetry. And there was a teacher in Jamaica at the school I went to, St. Andrew High School, who really wanted us to write in poems and write poems. And we did do that. And I did it off and on, but it wasn't until I think I was teaching, and I was teaching the Writer's Craft course, which is a creative writing course here in Ontario. And I thought, well, I have to do what my students are doing. And then I started going in a haphazard way. It wasn't a very planful way to different poetry writing workshops. And there was one that I went to. I was on a holiday in Santa Fe, and there was a poetry workshop at a museum, and I just went. And then very fortunately, there was a lady poet that I used to bring to the school that I was teaching at, Wendy Morton from Souk, BC. And she used to run these poetry retreats, and she invited me to come. And that's why I went twice. And that was incredible because just being around people like that. And then in working with other writers in various writing groups, I realized that short stories were just not my thing. They just couldn't get there. And it took too long to say what I want to say. And poetry is much more concise and seems to me much more powerful. So that I pushed myself in that direction.
And your poems are certainly powerful. Do you think that if the person has interest, of course, do you think that anyone can learn to write poetry?
Yeah, because I think there are aspects of the craft that can be learned, but you have to have an impulse to it. And then some people will write better short stories than they will write poetry,
That's true. That's definitely true. I love the poem that you wrote called Good Girls, Bad Girls. You started out in standard English, and then you switched to patois. And at the book launch, you read this poem. Everybody was laughing. And, you said you are a bad girl. So I just want to talk about the fact that you had dreadlocks, or locks as we call it, at a time when many Jamaicans and other colonized people leaned towards Anglo culture over the Afro culture. It feels to me that you embraced Afro culture,
Yes.
or at least both of them. And it just felt so brave and real, but yet in a way a bit defiant. I saw this picture of you at a private school teaching, and there you were with your locks. Can you speak to that? I mean, I do feel it was brave, actually. Am I wrong?
It might have been brave. It was just something I did. There are many things that I've done in my life that in hindsight were brave, but I just did them. But I'd always wanted to have long hair. As a child, I did the thing that a lot of Caribbean girls did back in the 50s, right? You would pin a scarf to your hair and pretend you had long hair, right? And blowing in the breeze because, all our dolls had long hair. It was, yes. So I used to do that. And then I realized that the only way that I would have long hair is if I had dreadlocks. And so I think it was 1993. Yes, 1993. I just decided I'm going to have them and just decided to grow them. And I started with dreadlocks when I was working at the United Way, and then I went back into teaching at the private school, and nobody said a thing. Nobody asked a question. And they just grew and grew and grew. And I did have really long hair because they were right down the middle, down to my bottom, actually, before they got to the point where they pulled too much, right? And we had to cut them.
So there's another poem that I'd like to talk about. And I think that everyone on the planet can relate to this scenario. My friend at the book launch heard you read, and she said that this poem gutted her and reminded her of how things can look one way on the outside, but so very different on the inside, so very different in reality. It's a poem, Graffito, and it is in Patois, but could you read this poem and then translate? And I think this poem resonated so much with me is because we all take photos, especially today, and we can look at a photograph and think, oh, this person is so happy, or what a happy family. But the photo doesn't always show the truth. So take it away, Jennifer.
Okay, Sgraffito. Look at the picture good. You see, said the father him hand round the girl picnic them. That hand never used for hug. If you was to scrape off the surface of the picture, you would have seen the knife where him used to stab the girl them in them back. Or him cut them heart and left them hungry to fill them belly with father love. This your picture now show how them take them self-esteem for stuff up hole, nyam dirt and spit blood, cut them tongue and sharp word and cry. Lord, how them cry. You have to walk to see the tears behind the laugh, them a laugh in the line photograph.
Deep, very, very deep. And now for your explanation of anyone listening who is not familiar with Jamaica, as we call it.
Okay, so sgraffito is a term for art. It actually comes from pottery, I believe, and it's an Italian word that means scratched away. So you have the clay, and then you put a layer over top, and then you scratch away to get the pattern. So it's the idea of trying to see what is there by scratching away. And so this is coming from, as you have said, a photograph that looks like happy. You know, there's the father and the daughters, and he has his hand around them, and he looks like it's all very happy. But if you would look in the picture, if you look clearly in the picture, you see that he has his hand around them, but that hand was never used to hug. And hand in this case is arm. You know, Jamaica, we call everything from the elbow from the fingertip to the shoulder hand. Okay. So it was never used to hug. So if you could see behind, you would see that he actually stabbed them in their back. Right? So it's a metaphorical knife, but there were backstabbing and cutting out their hearts and leaving them hungry for father love, because he didn't give the love that they wanted, right? So he's leaving them hungry for father love. And the picture doesn't show how they took their self-esteem to stuff up a hole. Well, that's another metaphor. Like, you're just not actually using your self-esteem for what it's meant for. Yeah, and how eating dirt, spitting blood, cutting their tongues on sharp words, and crying. And so the idea that they cried a lot, and you would have to work to see the tears behind the laugh, that they look like laughing in the lying photograph.
Amazing. Amazing that you put that experience to poetry. Wow. In another poem, you describe your friend as a living work of art. In another, you write about casting off the fears and traumas of childhood, stepping into your own power and celebrating that power. you describe God as a goddess. Do you think that the world's religions subdue women, or something about our culture?
Well, the short answer is yes. They're not. I mean, you know, the all the original religions with the goddess have more or less disappeared. Um, and for me, you know, well, not to go into too much of it, but I do think a goddess is a more open, loving, fertile in emotionally as well as physically deity. So that's where I'd prefer to go.
I like that, fertile emotionally as well.
Yeah.
Where can we get the itch of ghosts and other poems?
So this is the challenge. I decided to self-publish because I have reached, I'm in my 70s. The flogging stuff around different publishers takes years, and I didn't want to do that. I have other things I want to do. So right now you can get it from me, but my hope would be that some publisher would pick it up now, right? I mean, yes, they would do some more editing, whatever, but that would be wonderful. So that's the next journey, to see if I can get somebody to do so that it can be sold. Because, I didn't think that people would love it this much, but it has worked that way. And that is very humbling and scary. I did How Many Miles to Yesterday, the memoir. I did turn it into an ebook, so it's available on Amazon as an ebook. I didn't think it would be worth the money to put the poetry as an ebook, because I don't think poetry sells to the same extent as a memoir or prose does. So that would be a lot of money for not a very big audience.
Right.
And besides which, it's a nice looking book and it feels good.
It does. It's a nice looking book, and I have my copy. So we'll have your information so that the listeners can order from you.
Yes.
And it was such a pleasure that you spent some time with me today on Heart to Art. Your book is inspiring. The poems are amazing. Your poetry all tells stories. And I think that's what I love the most.
Yes.
So I got a story from each one. And for anyone listening, Jennifer's memoir, available on Amazon, you said?
Yes.
Really explains a lot of those poems. That some of the poems are included in the memoir as well. And the memoir is How Many Miles to Yesterday.
Yes, this is what it looks like, with a picture of me as a baby.
I love that cover.
Yes.
Thank you again so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. The time just flew, and it's so wonderful. And thank you so much.